Hello and welcome to another episode of the Business of Business podcast. I'm your host, Roy. This is going to be the fourth installment of our digital marketing series on SEO. Glad to welcome Bobby with Signa Marketing back to the show. How's it going, Bobby?
Hey, Roy. Great to be here. How you?
Yeah, man, it's going good. I just want to thank you so much. This has been an insightful series, and for those listeners that may be just tuning in for the first time, if you'll go back a couple weeks, we put out episode 1 as an introduction, and episode 2 we talked about the on-site SEO, and then last week we talked about something that's not really mentioned a lot, but off-site SEO and the importance, because that's kind of some of the Google foundations are built on that off-site, the links back to our site. So today we're going to talk about re-optimizing or redesigning an existing site, and I guess this is for people that maybe have neglected the SEO function for a period of time, and it may be easier just to kind of start fresh again.
Absolutely. Yeah. So a lot of people, have had an existing website and they're like, hey, you know what? I'm not happy with my current rankings or organic traffic. And they're finding ways of how to make tweaks to it and stuff like that. But usually the approach is kind of where a lot of people struggle at. And so that's what we're going to cover today.
Okay, great. Well, let's just jump right in. So what would be, where do we draw the line between tweaking what we've got and maybe just throwing up our hands saying, look, we just need to start from the beginning?
Yeah, for sure. So a lot of times it comes down to the foundation and really assessing, is your website's foundation from an SEO standpoint workable, and can we build off of it? Or is it going to actually hold us back from doing what we need to do? And so a lot of times it will be even from a technical aspect that the site's foundation is just super outdated. It's going to be incredibly slow forever and always. It just really needs to be 100% uplifted. And sometimes the cost of doing that type of work is more than just replacing the entire website. And so that's what you're looking to assess. Sometimes when you're redesigning, when you do redesign a new website, the opportunity with doing that is that you can actually have the entire website meet your SEO objectives 100%, even from the user experience standpoint. Yeah. And a lot of times you can't get that type of impact if you're uplifting a current website.
Yeah, I think you mentioned a good point in one of our previous episodes, is that really that's what SEO is all about. It's about that user experience, and Google has been very good at figuring out, what users want or where we need to take them. And so if we can design a good experience on our website, then probably our SEO is going to be up there anyway. But this is a point that I usually don't try to put out a lot of plugs, but this is where I will say that you need to reach out to an expert like Bobby and his team, because you could spend a lot of time redoing or tweaking your existing site and spend time and money and still end up nowhere. And then, or if you make this decision to re-optimize, it's a big decision, takes some time and energy, but you can do it wrong too. And so you can redesign a site and end up right back in the same place where you were with your old site. So this is a great time for, I guess, that SEO audit where somebody like yourself and your team can really have a lot of input. First off, making the go or no go. Do we need to change? Do we need to redesign? But then what are some of the components that we need to capture in that redesign?
Yes. Yeah. 100%. You always actually, whether you hire an agency or even do it yourself, you always want to conduct an audit to understand, where are you at? What do you need to do? And so you can make those decisions that are best for the business. Doing an SEO audit, of course, you want to start with benchmarking stats. So some really high level stats will of course be like analyzing your organic traffic year over year to see, are you trending in the right direction? What are the pages that make up the most of your traffic? What are the top ranking keywords that are driving the most traffic to your site? Stuff like that. There's going to be some other indicators that are a little bit more underground, but are strong indicators like domain authority, and then also what we call citation flow and trust flow. And I know those are almost kind of like gibberish there, but even if you do some Google searches, you'll start to see why these metrics are important, because they're indicators to letting us know, are we trending in the right direction, or actually are we doing stuff that is very unhealthy for our SEO ranking?
Yeah, a couple questions I have. First off is that, this is a long play. And so, It's not recommended that you put your site up and after 2 weeks you're wringing your hands about SEO, wondering what we can do to, I mean, we always want to do to make it better, but a couple weeks is not gonna, you're not gonna have a huge amounts of traffic flowing over to you. But the other thing I was thinking about too was, so what about stagnant sites? I mean, just somebody that built a site 5 years ago, even though it may be optimized for mobile and it has a lot of the right features, but there's been no update or no new activity. Does that penalize you? Do you need to be refreshing your content quite a bit?
The best way to answer that question is really depends on the actual industry and the service itself. You know,
Okay.
has your service actually changed? You know, because you don't want to necessarily change things just to change it. You want to make sure that you're doing everything with a purpose.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, to this day, of course, do we still see certain static websites that haven't been touched in 8 years still rank at the top of Google? It happens, absolutely.
Okay.
You know, so every site in the industry is different because each micro market in that sense is different.
Okay.
And different players are doing different things. So if you're in a very competitive market where everyone is really doing a lot of optimization work, well, then you'll most likely have to match that speed or surpass it so that you can provide, you know, more value to the end user. But are there certain industries that are, you know, much slower in terms of how they move?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And at that point, you know, the competition's probably less and everyone's more static in that point.
Okay. Yeah, and even at that, I think a good way to differentiate yourself is always putting out fresh content, answering people's questions, because, you know, like what I think about is different situations that come up in my day. They're not always the same. And so being able to write or do a video about what was that certain situation, that it never hurts to put it out there, because you can probably bet that somebody else is having that same problem and they're searching for an answer. So it might as well be you that they hit to find that answer.
That's exactly right. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, when it comes to re-optimizing a site, that's what is going to kind of, what we touched on earlier is it's going to have to do with your foundation and really assessing, hey, is this foundation workable or not?
Yeah.
Or is it going to cost me more, you know, just working off this foundation, or is it going to be more effective and more efficient budget-wise, just replacing the whole thing?
Yeah, a couple things, again, we talked about in last episode is if, you know, back in the olden days when they actually had to hard code sites and they weren't automatically optimized for cell phones. So, again, probably more important if you're in the B2C space than, you know, B2B may still be a lot on computers. But, you know, that's something to look at, is that it's not going to do you much good to really tune in your site if when people look at it on a phone, it's just a total mess. So that would be a huge key. And the other thing I think is speed. You know, Google wants our stuff to load faster and faster. And it's kind of counterintuitive because we also need to use more pictures and more videos. So those, you know, those have a drag, but there are ways to compensate for that. But those are the kind of things I think that really some of the big points that you may want to look at before undertaking redoing a whole site.
Yes, that's exactly it, 100%. And with the cool thing with redesigning a site, even from a technical standpoint, is you can at least build it in such a way where it is faster.
Yeah.
It is rendering photos much quicker and stuff like that too. Because sometimes to take an existing site and really have to nitpick and do those types of optimizations can cost a lot of time. And a lot of times you're kind of just, there's conflict and more friction in that sense.
Yeah.
But when you are redesigning a website, the benchmarking aspect is huge because you may have a site that is actually ranking really high for certain pages, you know, and there's a lot of traffic and you don't want to disrupt that. And so that's why when you approach redesigning a website and replacing a whole site, you really want to make sure that you are not disrupting what's already working.
Yeah.
And so that's why the benchmarking aspect is so important. One example of that would be making sure that you don't really mess with the URL structure too much in such a way that it's going to disrupt the rankings. If you have to do that, which sometimes absolutely you have to do that to reorganize information on the site, you want to make sure that you have 301 redirects in place, which means that you're telling Google, hey, this URL doesn't exist anymore, and here's the new version of it permanently, forever. Here it is. And so as long as you're setting those rules and in that sense, and guiding the search engine, then you're following a process that's very safe to maintain those rankings that you already achieved. You're just directing traffic into a different area.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so what is, let's talk about domain authority. I think we've touched on it, but if you could tell us a little bit more about that.
Yep. So domain authority is a metric created by Moz as a company, MOZ. And so if you even type in domain authority on Google, you'll see their article most likely pop up at the very top to explain, why they created this metric. But essentially, it is a metric to gauge the authority of a particular website, and it's graded between 0 and 100. Your Facebook and Google's are going to be 99. They're right. Extremely high. But a lot of mid-level sites will tend to sit between, that 30 to 50, 60-ish, around there. Once you start to gain to some pretty heavily authority sites, that's when you start looking into the 70, 80s, and then maybe even 90s. Those are like your big publisher sites and stuff like that. However, but local businesses and stuff like that, you'll see local businesses sitting between that 30 to 50. Ideally, what you want to do is get to 50s. 30 is kind of considered healthy, but you're not ranting and raving about it either, and it will be reflected in your ranking. So getting to 50, 40, 50 is really optimal at that point.
Yeah, and if I'm not wrong, you can go on Moz, and I think you can just plug your domain in there, and it'll return what that is, so you can get a good idea.
Yes, exactly. And that's why when about to start your SEO journey as a business owner or publisher, you have to think long term and know, okay, I'm going to start right now, and a year from now, we're going to start getting some pretty good consistent traffic. Right. 6 months, you'll start to see things happening. Absolutely, if you're doing things right. But the maturity of that traffic is definitely a year out, and then hardcore, really solidifying and building it even further, is 2 years and above after that. And so that's why the question of, sometimes we'll hear a question of, when can I stop SEO? And that's almost like, well, when do you stop your business?
Right.
When you stop business, money stops coming in.
Right.
And SEO is the same way. You can, a business, say, for example, you have capital stashed away from all the, business you've stirred up. Maybe it'll last you another year, but it's going to slow down at some point. Yeah. And with SEO, it's the same thing. It's a momentum game. So if you stop SEO after a year, well, you'll still probably absolutely be getting traffic and stuff like that, but you're opening the door for vulnerability because you have competitors really trying to take over your position. Yeah. So that's why SEO is actually just an effort that actually never stops. It's something you always have to be involved in.
Yeah, because it's like being at the top of the mountain. Even if you're at the top, there's always people that are trying to unseat you from the top. So it's always, even if you still remain very relevant, there's always other people out there creating content and doing other things. And, again, we'll mention that this is such a long-term play that I was listening to a podcast the other day about somebody posting some videos, and they said it took them like 4 months of posting daily videos, but they finally saw that pop in there. So, we just can't expect, maybe we get lucky and something goes viral. There's always that chance. But, for most of us normal people, it's just that daily grind of doing the things that you've got to do every day, putting out good content, working for those backlinks, just trying to put this whole thing together. As you said, it's a big puzzle. We're just trying to find all the right pieces that fit.
That's exactly it. Yes. And SEO can pay dividends. And when you invest in it, you do it right, it'll pay dividends from a business perspective. Because how I mentioned earlier, when you're sleeping, you're attaining traffic.
Right.
It's not a campaign. A campaign is a faucet of traffic. You can turn it on, turn it off.
Yeah.
But when you attain organic rankings, it's something that's very consistent as long as you keep feeding the momentum.
Right. So, so we've gone through our benchmarking, and well, before we do that, you mentioned trust flow. I want to ask, what is the trust flow?
So trust flow and citation flow are two metrics that are created by a tool in a company called Majestic. And so trust flow is going to be a measure of the trustworthiness of the links that are pointing to your site.
Okay.
Citation flow is the influence that these links have. in terms of rankings on your sites or in the authority on your site.
Okay.
And so those two metrics are really important to make sure that you're attaining healthy backlinks and that you're not, getting links from sites that have really low trust, scores and stuff like that. That would be a bad indication. So that's why you want to make sure that those two metrics are healthy and getting as close to the number 50 as possible.
Okay.
That's what you want to strive for. So, and typically those two metrics are something that's really used by SEO strategists. It's not necessarily something that business owners have huge involvement in.
Yeah.
Even when it comes to domain authority, the way that we convey results is through organic search traffic, and is that traffic converting into leads or calls or sales.
Okay.
And so we always recommend that when you start really working, well, we recommend the moment you have a website to have Google Analytics, but if you start to do SEO, you want to make sure that your Google Analytics account is set up and that you have goals set up within so you can measure contact form submissions, phone calls, stuff like that.
Okay.
Because even though it's organic traffic, we want to make sure we're getting the right traffic that's making a difference to our bottom line.
Yeah, and that's I guess that's one of the bad points about trying to buy traffic is if it's not really sustainable. And the other thing that we've talked about is time on a site. So if we're getting clicks on a page and then they're exiting our website, that's bad. So what I try to tell everybody is just you need to have a lot of patience, formulate a plan, and just stick with it and carry that out. It'll be much better than trying to take a shortcut, because some of these shortcuts may really may have a pop for a day or two, but if you get caught, they can penalize you for the next 6 months or a year to come. So anyway, just always want to reiterate that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, and anyone that logs into your Google Analytics account is going to tell when they see a spike of traffic just go up out of nowhere and it's going like this and it just stops. They're going to be like, okay, well, what was that, a paid campaign or something? But if it's organic traffic farms, that's no.
Yeah, because we kind of get back to this is more social media related, but there's a difference between vanity likes or vanity traffic, just so we can say we've got a big number, versus that quality of somebody that may actually be a potential buyer. I mean, and that's what it is. I would rather have one website hit with the guy that bought than have 100 or 1,000 people just say, yeah, we really like the site. I usually use this example that, the other night we went out to eat and I pulled out my 1,000 likes from Facebook and tried to pay the bill with it, and they didn't take that, So anyway, so now we've gone through our benchmarking. We figured it out. We want to start, we need to rebuild our site. We're just going to start from scratch. So kind of where do we go from there?
So from there, once you've actually made a decision of like, okay, is my foundation workable, or if not, then the redesigning process, kind of how we were touching on, is you want to make sure you're careful with it and that you hire the right agency that understands how to redesign websites while maintaining SEO rankings.
Yeah,
that's super important. So just vet that part, because there is a way to go about that, and how to be careful with it, et cetera. If you are able to take the current site and uplift it in terms of applying SEO optimizations and uplifting it from that perspective, then that may be something that you can do internally if you have the resources, or you will have to hire an SEO agency that has the development capabilities to implement those items too. So it's not just SEO, but technically what has to happen on the site from a development perspective to do things correctly. And so that's what you'll look for, is to make sure that those capabilities are within that agency to make sure that you make the right decision.
Yeah, touch on too the difference between being able, if the fundamentals or the base of the website is good and we want to stick with it, maybe it's just some other technical tweaks. The difference between working with a live website versus sometimes like when you restart and just redo from the very beginning, you kind of have that dummy site sitting out there by itself that you can make all your changes on. You can see what's happening, but you're really not messing with anything that's live. So tell us a little bit about that differentiation.
Yeah, absolutely. So as far as any development process, you always want to make sure that you're making changes and updates on a staging site, which is a copy of your live site, and making sure that everything's really just done on that first,
Yeah.
to make sure that there's no issues or anything like that, that you're not going to cause any functionality errors. And then once everything goes through a quality assurance process within the firm, then all those changes get applied and pushed to the live production site.
Okay. Yeah, and it's always good to have either yourself or somebody on your team actually visit your website every now and then, because, a friend of mine, we were talking the other day, and so tried to send her an email and it wouldn't go through. And so I said, well, maybe I got the site wrong. So I went over to the site and the site was down. And, it's something that we don't think about. We just think that it's always up and running, but somebody kind of needs to be in charge of, looking at that periodically just to make sure it's still up and something didn't happen.
Yeah, you can never go wrong with a good QA process.
Exactly. All right, Bobby. Well, is there anything else you want to add about the redesign before we move on?
No, I think that wraps up the re-optimizing and redesigning aspects.
Okay.
There's a lot of variables that go, after the last step of, making sure that whether you have internal resources or you're hiring out, that you make sure that you have the capabilities to follow the process safely for redesign, or how to approach re-optimizing a current site. That's really going to be the next step, is making sure that you are covered and have the right capabilities to execute either route.
All right. Well, Bobby, we thank you so much for this. Has been a great series. Again, I want to just go back, and the episode 1 was the introduction. Then we went through on-site SEO. Then we went through off-site SEO, and we went through the re-optimization or redesign of an existing site. Thank you so much for your insights and for doing these series. These have been great. I've enjoyed it and learned a lot, as I know our listeners have as well. So, first off, before we get out of here, tell everybody how can they reach out and get a hold of you, either at Signa Marketing or at Blueprint.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find us online at signamarketing.com. That's spelled SIGN as in Nancy, A marketing.com. And then you can find us on social media at Signa Marketing is our handle. We have a great Q&A fun show called Blueprint, where I answer any and all digital marketing questions. And so if you have a question out there that's super specific to your situation, I'm more than happy to provide answers for it. Feel free to just submit your question as a comment or a direct message on any of our social media platforms, and we'll make sure that it gets answered in the next episode.
Okay. Well, thanks so much again for taking time out of your day to be with us. We appreciate it, and hopefully we'll be looking forward to you putting another one together.
Awesome.
Okay. All right. Well, that's going to do it for us today. This is the Business of Business podcast, and we can be found at www.thebusinessofbusinesspodcast.com. We are on all the major social media networks. Of course, a video version of this interview will go up on YouTube when it goes live as well. So y'all reach out and get some help from Bobby. Get your SEO dialed in. It's something that you definitely need to do, and it's always a challenge. It's always changing, and so if you can keep up with it yourself, great. If not, reach out for some professional help and guidance. Until next time, I appreciate the listeners very well, and until next time, take care of yourself and take care of your business.